All right, guys, how's it going? It is another episode of Refounding Fathers. This is an amazing show. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from this one in particular. The last time we did this, I had several people reach out to us and talk about this being a model conversation between liberals and conservatives and libertarians and how we can actually relate to each other in a civil way, respecting each other. So it's about our fourth or fifth time doing this, I think. We've had Chris on the show many times for this, representing more of the liberal side in those arguments, and then Kyle as well on the libertarian side, and then myself doing my best on the conservative side. Always a pleasure having you guys, so welcome to you both. We got a lot to talk about tonight, and I can't wait to get into it. I would tell you guys that this show is definitely, I would say, the most challenging one that I do. I enjoy it. But it's challenging with you guys because you bring such a great perspective to it, and I really appreciate that. And then one of the best parts is we're starting to take some of the quotes and images and things like that that come from this show and showcase them. We did that a couple of times and had some good feedback. But tonight I'm going to need it because we're going to get into the presidential candidates. So I brought some beer. This is a Hardywood Bubby's Blackberry Cobbler, and I'm pretty excited about it. It is absolutely delicious. So that's what I'm drinking now from Virginia, where I used to live. How about you, Chris? What do you got?
I have a Lagunitas IPA, which longtime watchers will remember I am slightly allergic to due to its plethora of hops. So if I do start sneezing, don't worry. COVID has not gotten me. The conspiracy to take down Trump has not claimed me as a victim. Nice. It is just allergies.
Nice. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, man, got to say, just off the top, I love Chris's dedication to the game. He's allergic to the hops. My man keeps going to the well. That's dedication, and I appreciate that. And also, man, Blackberry beer. Did I hear that right?
That's right.
Blackberry Cobbler beer.
So, I got into this app called Taver. They're not yet a sponsor of our show. I hope they decide to do that in the future, but free publicity, until they do. What it allows you to do is go in and pick out different craft beers on an app on your phone, and then they send you a case of it at the end of the month. And so I got a bottle of this Bubby's Blackberry Cobbler. You can see that right there. It is absolutely delicious. And just put that in the fridge for a few hours, and now I'm enjoying it. So
nice, man. Yeah, Tavor. Is it Tavor? Taver? Whatever it is. Tavor. Throw us the dollars, baby. Throw us the dollars. I'm actually not drinking any beer. I've been out in the pool. I had kind of a light day today, so I was drinking some Natter Days out there, keeping it super classy. And so I've kind of transitioned to just some water. But I'd like to say, just to start off the show, I got to congratulate Chris, man. He doesn't know I'm doing this. Chris, congratulations, man. Your state, Ninth Circuit Court, repealed the standard capacity mags today. Congratulations, man. You can go out and you can get yourself a 10, a 15, a 20, a 30-round magazine for all those guns that I'm sure that you got, man.
And I plan to immediately.
My man. Hey, listen, if you buy a gun, I'll help you buy a gun. I'll send you all the mags you want.
My wife is cheering that on in the background. So you and she are both terrible influences. And I hope you're watching
I like it, Miss Souza. Let's do it.
That's awesome. So some other exciting news that I wanted to share with you guys, as I just released it today, is that we're going to get a chance to do an interview with George Will. I'm going to bring up his picture now. So George Will has been around the conservative and the libertarian movements for a long time. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his commentary. I think it was 8 years before I was born. And so he's been doing this for a minute. He was very inspired by Barry Goldwater back in the day. He watched Reagan come up, supported him. I think wrote several of his speeches and helped him with his debate prep and things like that. And then he's been involved in politics ever since. He's got his column that he writes. He's several books that he's written. The most recent one I've got here, you can see how thick this book is. This is The Conservative Sensibility by George Will. You can see that right there on the screen. And, so I've been jumping into this book ahead of our interview, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it first because, it's intimidating. He's an extremely smart guy. He's an atheist, and so he's part of the conservative movement, libertarian movement. but he makes no secret about his religious beliefs. But at the same time, he'll tell you that he's a non-controversial atheist. He's someone who can get along with people that have different backgrounds and doesn't feel the need to attack them. But that belief comes out in his work. What he talks about thus far in the book that I've read is he talks about the founding fathers, and he really makes the argument and draws from other scholars and political thinkers to say that the founding fathers can be considered apart from their belief and their faith in God. He points to Thomas Paine. He talks about Thomas Jefferson. He's a huge fan of James Madison, and basically says when you consider their religious beliefs, that could lead to their, what they did with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, but it doesn't have to. And then he kind of charts a path for a secular or an atheist to arrive at the same conclusion. He sees the founding fathers as really children of the Enlightenment, who were the first ones to bring a country to fruition based upon modernistic ideals as opposed to ancient ones. And then he talks about the progressive era later on, and how Woodrow Wilson and others tried to change that. But that was absolutely fascinating. I mean, we're sitting here doing this show talking about the founding fathers and that conversation and what led to their success. But I was curious first for Chris, what do you make of that argument based on what I'm saying and maybe what you know about George Will?
Well, first of all, as long as we're congratulating each other, I want to congratulate you on landing such a notable figure to interview. I have always really admired George Will, especially his ability to craft a sentence and his ability to craft an insult. To quote Jack Donaghy from 30 Rock, there is no one bitchier than conservative males. And that is a statement that has always made me think of George Will. Because he is just a master at the kind of condescending slapdown. And his targets in the Trump era have been very richly deserved. Of course, in the past, I always thought he was just being mean to me, but now I really enjoy his gift of language.
Yeah. How about you?
Also, let me just start off with a congratulations. Wall Street Journal, I think in the late 70s, maybe it was the 80s, called him the most influential journalist in America. So, I mean, to get him, on your show to talk to him, that's fantastic, man. So congratulations there. It's an interesting premise he's got going on. I'd like to maybe press into that a little bit, thinking about the Enlightenment. I mean, the Enlightenment fundamentally wasn't new ideas. I mean, you can point back to Aquinas and others who, the same kind of in that same line of thinking, tabula rasa, all men are created equal, that whole line of thinking. So, I think it's a really cool opportunity for you, and love to hear about your conversation.
Yeah, we'll definitely see that. So we're gonna look at filming that next week, probably Thursday is what we're aiming for.
Cool.
So be excited, and then we can talk about it too next time we do one of these sessions. But I think it's gonna have something that appeals to both of you guys. As he kind of looks at a broader definition of the conservative movement than what we currently think of it often as. So that's what I'm excited about the most. But let's get into kind of the meat of this show. We've got a couple different topics. The first one, I feel like we have to talk about is now that the candidates are really set for the major parties, we can kind of compare and contrast what we see in their platforms. And I thought that would give each one of us a chance to kind of work through, one, what are the policy positions that you see that are the biggest that are associated with the candidates and most in terms of change, and then two, really what's their appeal, and not necessarily to you, I mean maybe to you personally, but what's their broader appeal? What are they, what messages are they really trying to beat home to their base that they think is going to pay off? And then we can look at that over the next couple of months as we go into the election and see, are they changing that messaging? Are they keeping it the same? Is it working in terms of the polls? And then as we hit a point of the actual election, we can look back on this and say, did it work for them or did it not? So I thought that would be, really great, and trying to be at least somewhat objective as we go through this, and then maybe hitting each other with some questions. So as we go into that, I think, the first one I'd love to hear about is, Chris, just your take now that Biden has chosen Harris as his VP, the wait is over on that. You see all kinds of attacks have come out already against her from the right. But that being the case, the stage is set for him and his ticket. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and then we'll probably have some questions for you.
Yeah, so a big question that has been kind of percolating for years now and really reached a boiling point during the Democratic primary was, what are people looking for in a post-Trump era, or I guess now in a pre-post-Trump era? Are we looking for big change? Are we looking for big structural change? Are we looking for progress on a huge, almost accelerationist level? Or are we looking for a return to normalcy? And I think Joe Biden really answered that question for the majority of Democratic voters, and even a lot of independents and Republicans who are thinking of switching lanes in the coming election. Joe Biden, his appeal is that he's not Trump. His appeal is that he's not Bernie Sanders. He is somewhere in the middle of those two extremes, obviously closer to Bernie Sanders than to Trump. But, people want a break. People want a president that they don't have to think about every day. So, it would be great to just enthuse about how exciting Joe Biden's policies are and what a great game changer this is. That's not what I'm going to talk about with Joe Biden. That's not his appeal. That's not a message that I think he can successfully push. His message and his appeal, I think, is that he is a return to normal. He is calm. He is competent. He has years and years of experience, and he is someone that can at least unite some Americans. He's got a record of working with Republicans, which he was bashed for during the primary. But the extreme left, thankfully, is not controlling the Democratic Party right now, and we are really trying to get broad support. And I think Joe Biden, for all of his flaws, is the right candidate for this time.
Yeah. So one of my thoughts is I've been observing different groups that really just hate Donald Trump, especially Republicans or former Republicans or whatever, and like the Lincoln Project, right, that's out there, and they have jumped on that whole argument of, well, we're endorsing Joe Biden and supporting him because he's returned to normal. He, is a candidate we can trust. Can you explain how you define that, what you mean by him being a normal candidate versus, say, Trump, and why he's not?
Yeah, so you almost have to define it based on the exceptions. Joe Biden has a long record of gaffes. He's often described as gaffe prone. He was even when Obama was president, and even before that. But the fact that we can still call him gaffe prone, I think says something, because no one ever describes Trump's comments as gaffes. It's just kind of this constant slew of offensive or ignorant or, dishonest statements. With Joe Biden, yes, he has gaffes, but that's because 90% of the time he talks like a normal human being. There's this attack line that he's got dementia. A lot of that is due to a stutter that, yes, has gotten progressively worse as he is getting older, as memory fades for anyone who is in their 70s. He doesn't have dementia. But he has a record. He was vice president for 8 years. And I think that Americans are just looking forward to, again, not having to think about the president every day and not having to worry about waking up to his irresponsible tweets.
Yeah. What about his? Go ahead, Tom. You got a question?
Yeah. So you mentioned that Biden and Kamala were kind of a return, I guess, towards the middle, or they weren't extreme by any stretch, or they weren't the extreme part of the Democrat Party. I don't know. Can you maybe kind of dive into that a little bit more? Because everything that I'm seeing from their policies on the Green New Deal to abortion, which Kamala Harris supports abortion even after the baby has been delivered. That's not a centrist position. That's a very extreme position.
Yep.
Gun control. Every position that they've taken since the primaries, to me, has been as far left as Bernie. So, yeah, maybe dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you have a point about gun control in relation to Kamala Harris. Gun control is one issue where I've tended a little bit more toward the right in the last few years. I've been convinced by a lot of, pro-Second Amendment arguments. Kamala is a bit extreme. on that. I was also looking at Joe Biden's gun control policies earlier today, and there were a few that I was very much in favor, such as expanding universal background checks. And then there were a few that I felt were either grandstanding or maybe just based on the idea that, okay, we need to do something, not necessarily looking at what was practically possible or effective. So I do think you have a point on that. On abortion, I would need to do more research on Kamala Harris's position on that. I know Biden was very much against repealing the Hyde Amendment, which prevents taxpayer funding to abortion, although he may have changed his position on that.
Yeah, I'll say that Biden has changed his position on abortion because the Democrats have changed their position on abortion the last 47 years, which is how long he's been, a public servant. So you do anything for 47 years, your political party is going to change their position, and he's changed his right along with it from being against it to safe, legal, and rare, and now up to the to the shout your abortion movement that we find ourselves in.
Certainly, and I think that is a valid criticism of Biden. You could call him a flip-flopper. I think a more generous description would be that he's someone that tries to appeal to a broad coalition. As far as safe, legal, and rare, I'm not really sure what the stats are on post-birth abortions or even third trimester abortions. I do think they are fairly rare. My position on abortion is that it is a tragedy. It should be prevented and reduced. I favor policies that would effectively reduce abortion, such as taxpayer-funded contraception. I don't think prohibition on abortion works for the same reason that I don't think prohibition of guns or prohibition of alcohol works. I think when you make things like that illegal, you just end up creating a black market, an underground, where people still get the things that they want, but in a more dangerous and more socially costful, can't think of the word, way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I don't want to spend our whole time talking about abortion. I'd like to push back on that, but just to kind of push back on I guess Biden as a candidate, it wasn't really his position on supporting safe, legal, and rare. Just the fact that he, along with the party, has had a gradual shift to the extreme left position. So
my question would be, why did he choose Kamala Harris, and what does she bring to the ticket that he doesn't have? What do you think, Chris?
So that is a tricky question because, again, to just go back to the pre-existing question of whether Joe Biden should pick someone who has something that he doesn't already offer, or whether he was going to double down on a moderate. And the idea of broad appeal and pick someone like Amy Klobuchar, whose general line in the primaries, even more so than Joe Biden, was to just kind of be the Debbie Downer on everyone's grand chaotic plans for the liberal utopia. And I think he kind of found a balance between those two things. Kamala Harris, like I said, may be far to the left on issues such as gun control. Again, I'll have to look into her thoughts on abortion a little bit more. But I don't think that she is very much associated with the more extreme left movement. She was a very tough prosecutor in California, which is something that is not really de rigueur on the left anymore. And that is one of my criticisms of her, and probably my biggest reservation with Kamala Harris is, the sheer number of people that are in jail for misdemeanor offenses because of Kamala Harris. But, she's also not Elizabeth Warren or AOC or someone who is really kind of the punching bag for being, far left socialist in the Democratic Party right now. Yeah. So again, just like Joe Biden was kind of our middle ground option, I think Kamala Harris is kind of the middle ground vice president option. She's exciting in some ways because she's a woman, because she is a woman of color. And I say that without a trace of irony because that is exciting, because it's been an incredible and completely unfair rarity to have someone of color, and especially a woman of color, ascend to such a powerful position in our country. So that is something that is exciting. As far as her actual positions and record, much like Biden, she conveys competence. and she conveys a certain kind of warmth but strength at the same time. She conveys empathy. Yes, she's a little bit of a flip-flopper, a little bit of an opportunist in the way that she has kind of changed her positions along with the shifting political winds. But personally, I would kind of rather have someone that is able to think about what the public wants and offer it to them, instead of someone that is trying to appeal to a fringe minority of extremists.
Yeah. Okay. That's good stuff. So this is something we can jump back into, like I said, as we go along the campaign and see how it shifts and see how the rhetoric changes and maybe even some of the policy, debates change. I want to get a chance now to go into Donald Trump's candidacy and what that's going to look like. So, I mean, this is absolutely, fascinating to see the change here. Is you were talking about, Chris, about how Biden had a record and all that, and really before Trump came into office, he didn't have much of a record. He had been on, a few shows. He had some, failed candidacies in the past, but nothing as significant and obviously, as consequential as what he's done the past 3 years, soon to be 4 years. And now he has a record, right? And I remember when he was elected, there was this question of what is Donald Trump going to be like as a president? What is he going to do? Is he going to compromise? Is he going to, shift to the left or to the center in order to try to gain popularity? Or is he going to govern the way that he campaigned? And, my take on this, and I'll be interested to see what questions you guys have, is that by and large, from the point of view of his base and many others, I would argue, is that he has actually governed in the way that he campaigned. And that campaign was pretty far to the right. I mean, he was trying to rile up really some of the extremes, some of the hard right, and to say, hey, I am your guy. I'm a fighter. I am not like Jeb Bush. I'm not like the Bush family. I'm not going to shift to the middle. I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to do the right-wing agenda and continue fighting. And, if you remember, his biggest appeal was against political correctness. And I think we can all agree that he's been anything but politically correct in his administration. And then you look at the different policy positions that he has, and he's going to take the things that he's done in some areas quite a bit, and others maybe not so much, but he's going to take every little scrap of progress, and then he's going to broadcast that as, hey, promises kept. And that's what I see when I look at his campaign website and his press releases and all that, is that they're trying to broadcast the fact that, he continued to do the things that he promised he would do. Was he successful in everything? Maybe not, but he certainly, it wasn't for lack of sticking to the agenda. They'll blame, Democrats, they'll blame Comey and the investigations that were against him and all these other people, but they won't blame themselves because they'll say that we have been doing everything possible to make this happen. And you look on his websites and immediately they start talking about Democrats and a socialist agenda that they associate with everyone in the Democratic Party, and they say he is this righteous warrior that's against it. And for people who, I would say the appeal of Donald Trump is especially for people who lived through the last years of the Cold War, right, and have memories of what that was like. And they think of the Soviet Union and socialism being, this far-off ideology that the Russians had and North Korea, currently has, Venezuela has. They see it as this foreign ideology, and then they are shocked to see people like AOC or Bernie Sanders be up in front of the American press as American politicians talking about socialism being a good thing. Even if they make distinctions, they hear that word, and might as well be saying redcoats in 1812. They think it's on their doorstep, and they see Trump and Pence as their best chance to fight that. And that's the appeal. And then my last thing, before I'll look at what questions you guys have, is living in Florida. It's fascinating to me to see how their campaign works. There are at least three, probably more by now, at least 3 stores on my way to work, and they are selling all kinds of memorabilia, like American flags, Gaston flags, Trump flags, all of this stuff. They are selling these things as a, like, no kidding, store, either, in the same way that you would do food out of a food truck. They've got a little truck set up with property, or in some cases an actual brick and mortar store that they have purchased, and they are selling this stuff while they are obviously campaigning. And so it's not just people on the side of the road with the flag. It is straight up like open for business. And you look at Trump's website, and again, there's that business aspect of immediately it's asking you to donate. Immediately it's bringing his personality to the forefront, and you want to buy this. You want to buy what he's selling. And I think that's just got to be a fascinating, change in politics, as opposed to, hey, I want to campaign for your vote. No, I want to sell you a product. And I think that in many ways that's what he's doing, which is just going to get them much more money to be able to continue doing ads and things like that. So it's formidable, man. From what I see in Florida as a key swing state, he's certainly got, some ground to make up in the polls. But as the economy starts to improve and move out of COVID, I think it's going to be a very tight race. And he's going to continue fighting all the way up until the end. So what questions you guys got about Trump and his candidacy?
So it sounds like what you're describing is really good branding.
Yeah.
Which is what Trump has always been, perhaps the one thing that he really does excel at.
He really does. I mean, that's something that he has learned over the years, right? He's done everything from real estate to failed enterprises like Trump University that everybody makes fun of him for, the steaks and all that stuff. But the guy has been around for a minute, and The Apprentice and all that. He has learned how to come back to what works with people, what resonates. And, I see him personally, so, kind of beyond the appeal, I see him as a mercenary. I don't believe that many evangelicals identify with his statements on their faith. I don't think that, they follow him because he appeals to the things that they're hearing on Sunday, as much as this is a transaction. Is like we pay him in votes, or we buy his stuff, and in returns he gives us Supreme Court justices that are at least better than what we would get from the other parties. I want to show you this, but we're talking about abortion, and this graph right here shows the different states and the current state laws that they have in place, and you see that there are over half a dozen states that have no limit on when an abortion can occur. In others, such as Florida, where I live, it's 24 weeks. Others, it's viability. But in several states, you still have no limit to where an abortion can occur. And I know in Colorado, that could change here pretty soon. But it's fascinating how the country is in all these different, situations in terms of abortion that many on the right see truly as death. They see, the fetus as this is a murder. That's how they see that. And whether you agree with that, Chris or Kyle, or not, when you look at them thinking that way, maybe you can understand why when he starts to deliver Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and justices on the Supreme Court, they say, oh, wow, this is a guy who's actually giving me what I purchased, which when I voted for him. And so as opposed to, Bush, who gave us Roberts, right? You start to, or Reagan, who gave us Sandra Day O'Connor, right? Like they start to say, you know what, this guy is offensive in what he says. He is mean. He's vindictive. He's shallow. He's petty. His Twitter is crazy, in terms of what he says. He's probably self-righteous. All those things are absolutely true. But he is delivering what we asked for. And some people feel like they've never had that since Reagan. And even in Reagan's case, like I said, you got justices that some would say aren't conservative. And so that's...
So Wes, I guess my question then, when you say that he's giving people what they want, his promises is he though? Because, Roe versus Wade still stands. I have not seen evidence that Donald Trump has prevented a single abortion. I have seen more evidence that he has probably purchased a few. As far as his other promises, the wall remains unbuilt, aside from a few patches. Mexico remains a non-payer of that wall. Hillary still roams free, sometimes in the woods or something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if he really can run on promises kept. I mean, you've described the branding and the merchandising and his ability to develop this cult of personality. But outside that cult of personality, there are a lot of 2016 voters who voted for Trump who are looking around and saying, okay, so, you know, he separated some families at the border. Cool, I like that, but that has not made my life noticeably better.
Yeah. So let me kind of respond to that a little bit. Is you're talking about like the actual state of affairs, and what you have to take into account is the perception and how that matters and how people filter out information and what level of analysis and critical thinking that they actually do, right? So that's the first piece of it, and I can give you some examples. The second piece of it is you have to think about it in relative terms as well, okay? In terms of versus who? Versus Joe Biden? Versus George Bush? Versus Mitt Romney? Like, you think about has he delivered much on the wall? So like look at the wall, right? The wall itself, from the studies that I have read, has only added 3 miles of new construction. 3 miles. That's all he's gotten. There's been 90 miles of renovations to pieces that were actually existing already that he's just built up higher and better. And he has, talked about that 93 miles of wall, right, as a great success. And he wants to finish it and all that kind of stuff. Is that truly like what he, campaigned on in the beginning? Of course not. He was like, we're going to get the wall done and it'll be over. That hasn't happened. But there has been some level of work done, even if it's small. And what Trump is going to say is, okay, so I got you 93 miles of wall, either rebuilt or expanded upon. How much would you have gotten from the socialist Democrats who are against me? How much would Jeb Bush have gotten you? The same thing with the Supreme Court is, has he been able to overturn Roe v. Wade? No, obviously not. Has he been able to change a lot of these laws? No. But what if you had had a moderate Republican? It would be worse. What if you had had Joe Biden and the socialists, which is what he's actually running against, right? It would be so much worse. There was always this contrast. You see that on his campaign website. The first thing that it says is the high tax socialist Democrats are out, to get you. So in those respects, he is creating a standard that he can win at. He's creating a paradigm that in which he is always ahead of his competition.
So let the libertarian jump in here for a quick second here. I think you hit the nail on the head, Wes. I run in pretty evangelical circles. I was a pastor for a long time. I'm pretty in tune with what Protestantism and what evangelicalism is in America. And the vast majority of these people, they're not big Trump fans. They don't really like him. They don't really like his demeanor. They don't really like his tweets. They don't like the way he talks. They don't like his personal life. Yeah. But you're exactly right. It is transactional. Almost every conservative evangelical that I know who voted for Trump, at least in 2016, voted for a single issue, and that was the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And he delivered. And he delivered on that. And not just that, but also 200 other federal justices that have been appointed under him. And so from that, you could say that he has absolutely delivered. And the other thing that I know, and maybe I'm just speaking about my own parents and my own family here, who I guess are pretty typical kind of Fox News type conservatives, who obviously see the media as the enemy in a lot of different ways. They saw the way the media attacked and bullied Bush and Romney and basically every Republican. And the thing that they really love about Trump, again, not his policies necessarily, not his personality, they love that he fights back. Right. They love that he takes the fight back to them, as ridiculous as it is sometimes, as petty and over the line as I think it is some of the times. Man, they love that he fights back. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think there are some real criticisms, though, for Donald Trump, especially from a conservative standpoint. Massive government spending, just out of control government spending. Conservatives used to care about this until they didn't. And that, I mean, that should really raise a lot of red flags up here. Just increasing the size and the scope of the federal government, the abuse of executive orders, ruling by executive fiat. I think those are all fair criticisms of Trump. In my life, he's been the worst president in terms of gun rights, believe it or not, in my lifetime. By the way, he has directed the ATF to make laws by writing letters, right? Laws don't get made by writing letters. Laws get made through Congress. That's how our system is set up. But he's, directed the ATF to ban certain firearms accessories just, because he wanted them banned because they sounded good in the moment. Those are real criticisms that Trump has to reckon with.
So yeah, let me work through a couple of those real quick, and then we'll turn it over to you for the libertarian answer. Right? We'll see. But yeah, let me work through it. So the first thing you talked about was there are concerns about him as from a conservative standpoint, and I would echo that, Kyle. I would say like the whole cult of personality like really bothers me for sure. Yeah. This notion that America can't survive without Donald Trump as our leader. Like America has survived, the greatest empire, in the world at the time in Great Britain. America has survived a civil war, which was awful and bloody and terrible, and but many would say necessary, in order for us to actually move past slavery. I mean, hell, man, we survived slavery itself, right? Which was a awful, terrible evil that plagued the world and especially America for centuries. Segregation and all of those things were horrible things that the civil rights area fought. I mean, we've talked about that over the past few weeks on our Conservatism on Tap. We've still got ways to go in terms of race relations. But America survived 2 world wars. We have suffered all kinds of, 9/11, all these other things, and now you're telling me that America can't survive without Donald Trump. I don't believe it. I can't see myself supporting Biden and Harris in almost any way, but I also believe that this country is stronger, than anything that these candidates could throw at it. And so, I don't fall into that cult of personality. I look to personal responsibility instead of, a civil society that is engaged, and Americans using their rights for the right reasons as how we look at, is this country going to survive? Because if our survival is hinged upon one man, then we're already sunk. But I don't believe that's where we're at. So I would echo the criticisms that you have. When you talk about government spending and the deficit, in many ways I agree. I think one of the things that Donald Trump did was he invested heavily in foreign countries, including Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. And you see the recent deal that he did as the same type of traction that he's trying to regain. And a lot of that investment kind of overshadowed some of the government spending. But he refuses to touch entitlement programs. I mean, he's made that pretty clear that that's not going to be part of his campaign. And that's concerning because we need that. And especially when you have this, virus hit us for a year or more with this pandemic, that's when we should be able to access some of the money and savings and reserves that we should have, but we don't have that because we've been spending so much. So that's certainly concerning to me. And then, many of the other issues, you talk about gun rights and everything else, like absolutely, there are causes for concern. But my response to you, Kyle, is going to be the same thing that I said before, is that he's going to contrast that in relation to, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? The alternative would be so much worse. The areas I think, though, that he shines, in addition to the economic investment, is foreign policy. I would argue that he contrasts himself with Bush more than anyone, and people were hysterical that he was going to lead us into war with North Korea. Then they were hysterical, especially in the media, that he was going to lead us into war with Iran after Soleimani was killed. Like, here we go, we're going to war. Here comes the war drums. John Bolton's going to be at the front, of the Fifth Fleet going flying into Iran. We're not there. Are relations with those countries good or great? No, they're not. But we're not in this wholesale war. I shared a post a couple of days ago talking about the number of military fatalities and how in Trump's term, it's barely 15% of what Obama had in his term, right? So you see the fatalities have gone down. He's pulling us largely out of Afghanistan. He's pulling us out of Africa. He's consolidating our presence into places where we actually have resources and economic gains to be had, as opposed to spreading as far and wide with very little goals of actually achieving any terms of sustainability. And so, which is very different than Bush putting us into wars that, were justified for auspicious reasons. And so when I see those things, it muddies the waters a bit, enough to where people either they support him emphatically for the reasons that I said at the beginning, or they support him begrudgingly because, well, what's the alternative? What's the alternative? So that's the appeal. That is the appeal. Is the base is fired up, and that's going to drive it. And then enough evangelicals are going to say, you know what, like I'm either a single issue person or, you know what, the alternative is just so horrific to me that I can't think of anything, and yet I have to vote. So
sure.
We'll see if it carries them. But you want to get into the Libertarians?
Sure, yeah. We'll go to the party that stands no chance of winning right now. My beautiful Libertarians. All right, so I guess the appeal of the Libertarian Party is that we all understand, both Republicans and Democrats, that those parties suck. Just quite honestly, for every election that I've been around for in my lifetime, we say, well, look, our candidate's not great, but he's better than the alternative. Our candidate's not great, but he's the lesser of two evils, or she's the lesser of two evils. And so the Libertarian Party comes along and says, well, look, you don't have to vote for an evil candidate. You can vote for someone who provides a third way or a third alternative, who is in many ways a middle ground between these two parties. So we can take it kind of issue by issue here. But we think about in terms of drug legalization and immigration. Libertarians, specifically Joe Jorgensen, are pretty left wing on those issues. They support, generally speaking, the legalization of at least marijuana, if not most recreational drugs. And they also generally believe in, if not open borders, at least making immigration to and from the United States an easier process. So the free transfer of knowledge, ideas, and people, all of those things. But in terms of, say, gun control or healthcare or deficit spending, they're very much on the right side of things. Joe Jorgensen, for example, has said many times that she would abolish the ATF, which makes me extraordinarily happy. And she would work to repeal every gun law that we currently have. And of course, deficit spending, we want to reduce the size and scope and power of the federal government as libertarians. And then there are some kind of middle issues. So in terms of national defense, just to quote her, her goal is for America to become basically a giant Switzerland where we're all armed, but we're not going out doing anything. We're ready to defend ourselves if we have to. But generally speaking, we got our guns, we're safe here, and we don't want to mess with other people on a world stage, on an international stage. Rather isolationist, in fact. In terms of healthcare and climate change, I think the most libertarians, including Joe Jorgensen, may see these are big issues. But instead of pointing to a government and saying, government, you have to fix this problem, the answer is free markets. It's repealing regulations. It's repealing government interference in those markets to come to affordable and actually efficient and efficacious changes in those manners. So I guess you could generally put it this way. Libertarians want to trust our neighbors with more freedom than our government. So we'd rather default to giving our neighbors more freedom than giving our government more control. So
yeah, so
Libertarian Party. Let's hear the criticisms.
Well, my first one is for their campaign specifically is where do they stand on abortion, Kyle?
Yeah, so abortion is unsurprisingly kind of a middle road for many people. Initially speaking, Joe Jorgensen said it was a state issue, but she herself is pro-choice. In fact, this is the one reason I'm not going to support her. I'm basically a 3 or 4 issue voter, and abortion is one of those issues. And because she's pro-choice, I'm not going to be able to support her. So the party leaves it up to the candidates. For me, It seems like a very fundamental liberty issue, right? The most fundamental freedom is the right to live, and so
Yeah, I mean that's my
yeah,
struggle. That's what I think is preventing pull from the right. I'll let Chris speak to the left, but
yeah,
I just showed you a map that had 7 states that put no limits on when
yeah,
an abortion can occur, including right up until the day before pregnancy. Technically, now I agree with Chris that like that's very rare, but how in the world can that be legal? And how can
yeah.
someone who stands for the principles of the founding and talk about freedom and all of that, do that when at the same time she has no problem, supporting prostitution and other things
Yeah.
that are paradigm shifting. Like, so
Yeah.
we support prostitution because we love capitalism and sex, but we can't support, a fetus's right to live. Like, that is a struggle for me to get behind.
Yeah,
What do you guys?
no, it's a struggle. It's a struggle for me too, and so I'll represent the Libertarian Party for this exercise. But I mean, I agree with you 100% there. That again, I'm a single or double issue voter, and abortion is one of those things. It seems to me a fairly straightforward practice. It's in fact, when I talk about abortion with most people, I understand that most people I'm having a conversation with don't come from the same religious background that I do. So I don't even talk about religion when I talk about abortion. I talk about it fundamentally as a right, the right to live, and yeah, seeing as how the science is pretty undeniable. It backs up from conception that it's an individual person with separate DNA. I mean, you can walk through all the scientific arguments. That there's really, it's pretty crazy that libertarians are not leading the pro-life argument.
Yep.
So I have a lot to respond to there. Yeah, so to clarify my earlier position, I did say I don't think prohibition works. However, I am supportive of bans on third trimester abortion, except in cases of medical necessity. The reason for that kind of goes off of something that Kyle just said. Kyle, you are 100% right that a fetus is a separate human being, separate DNA. I really hate when people on the pro-choice side say that fetuses are not humans. I think that is obviously scientifically incorrect. The fundamental question is whether fetuses are people with rights. I think that in the third trimester they absolutely are, and that is because in the third trimester they have the ability to think and to feel. They have a functioning neural cortex. They have a consciousness, which, in my opinion, is where rights are really derived. If we didn't have the ability to think or feel, our rights would be a little bit meaningless. I don't think it's as straightforward an issue as you guys are kind of making it out to be, because there's a conflict of rights. Yes, the right to life is sacred, it's fundamental, but so is the right to bodily autonomy. So I think you have to factor in the rights of the pregnant person to control their body, their future, their reproductive health, and that's a balancing test. And in the first 2 trimesters, I think the balancing test has to favor the pregnant person, because that is the person in that scenario who has the ability to think, has the ability to feel, has a consciousness, has lived experiences. Whereas the fetus, may be, even from my agnostic perspective, sacred in a way because it is human, does not yet possess the same rights as the person that the fetus is inhabiting. So to me, it's a conflict of rights. It is a balancing test. Once you hit the third trimester, I think the right to bodily autonomy you've kind of compromised it yourself. For waiting too long. I know there are situations where, rare cases where people do not know that they are pregnant, or, they're escaping some kind of trauma or abuse. But this is why personally I favor greater access to contraception and even to early abortion access rather than third trimester abortions, which, as previously said, are rare. And in those states where they are legal, I would personally favor enacting laws to prevent third trimester.
Let me throw back in there just real quick. I mean, I don't want us to spend all of our time debating the libertarian position on abortion here, but I mean, there are arguments against everything you said as well, and I appreciate you had a very thoughtful reply, and I appreciate that about you, that we disagree, but we're able to do it thoughtfully. I think when you talk about viability of life, you can take that standard and you can apply it to people outside the womb at different points as well. As a man who is in a coma, for example, who is brain dead, does he not also represent viable life? So that same standard can be applied to other people outside the womb as well. So.
If someone is brain dead, though, their family members have the right to pull the plug. They do not have to continue using their resources to keep that person alive.
Sure. Okay, or maybe not brain dead, but let's say a person who's on life support who can't function on their own. So again, don't want to spend all of our time talking about this one particular issue about abortion. But man, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it on another episode for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's something we can jump into. And we'll kind of revisit this in the future with those two, because there's so much more to be said. But from what I see, Kyle, she's got the appeal of a third party, and I think there's an appetite for that. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's definitely an uphill battle, and I guess.
Yeah, I don't expect her to have a big showing, quite honestly. This is, after all, the most important election of our lifetime. I hear that every election, so that was a joke. But I mean, I don't expect to have a big showing for Jo. She initially seemed to be a pretty good candidate, then seems to have kind of fallen off and gotten a little squishy on a lot of different things. And most libertarians I know aren't very excited about her. So
I will say that I'll confess that I did vote for the Libertarian candidate in 2012 due to Obama's drone strike policies, among others. But that was very much not the most important election of our lives. That was between Obama and Romney, which was a very safe election, and an election where, it didn't really seem like the fate of the universe held in the balance. I do think it's ironic, jumping off your earlier point about, evangelical conservatives really being angry over the media bullying of Mitt Romney, which maybe did exist in 2012, but now we see the bullying of Mitt Romney kind of coming more from the right. I mean, we had Matt Schlapp threatening Mitt Romney's safety at CPAC. So that is an interesting paradigm shift to me.
Sure.
I will give it up for the libertarians. I've always respected left libertarians' positions on immigration, especially, as well as drug legalization and legalization of sex work. So I think your party is doing some great things.
Yeah. I mean,
despite the fact that they will not.
I had one of the libertarian candidates on here. I got to do an interview with Dan Berman, and I was very impressed with how he presented himself. Some of his stuff was kind of showy and that type of thing, but you've got to do that to get attention.
Sure.
He had some thoughtful answers and things like that. I think one of the biggest appeals from what I've seen is her talking about ending the endless wars and the constant war on terror, the constant endless foreign investment that we have. To what end, for what purpose, without any specificity. Again, the challenge with that is the fact that Trump, relative to I would say Bush especially, has not been throwing enormous amounts of boots on the ground or suffering immense amounts of casualties, and so that kind of like undercuts that argument. But you certainly got when you talk about the increase in government regulation, the increase in spending, deficit spending. I've shared posts on our page that show just how much spending Trump was leading with a Republican Congress in both the House and the Senate, and yet you see it continuing to go up, and it's kind of masked because there was so much economic growth, but it's still occurring, and that was before COVID even hit. So there's something to be said that, as well as the entitlement programs, starting to jump into those, and how much do we constantly put into these with
that's right,
accountability. So those are arguments that I think there's an appetite for, but it's tough. It's definitely tough, and you kind of see the reasons why based on our feedback. I want to get into kind of our last topic for tonight. Is I think, Kyle, you had a study from a think tank, a libertarian think tank called Cato, that you wanted to walk us through, right?
Yeah, the Cato Institute, well-known conservative, libertarian-leaning think tank, policy research center, whatever you want to call it. All right, so I know we're kind of running a little bit long, so I'll try to walk us through this pretty quickly and get some thoughts on it. But I want to start it off by asking you a simple question about whether or not you agree with this statement. So you can throw that first slide up if you want to, Wes. So think about this, and maybe it would help if you think about whether you identify yourselves as strong liberal, moderate conservative, or strong conservative. Wes, I'm going to go. You probably view yourself as a strong conservative. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Chris, would you call yourself a liberal or a strong liberal?
Liberal.
Okay, cool. All right. So with that in mind, agree or disagree with this following statement. The political climate these days prevents me from saying things I believe because others might find them offensive. Wes, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What about you, Chris?
I would say no.
You say no. All right. That's very interesting. All right. Cool. All right. So throw it over on that next slide there for us, Wes. And this is taken straight from the Cato website. And I'll post a link on my own Facebook page, or we can do it on the Burkean page so people can link straight to this. But we have a chart here where a certain number of respondents were polled on this question. And you see a similar question was asked in 2017 versus 2020. 2017 there's in blue, 2020 is in orange. And so it takes it by these different groups of people who identify as strong liberal, moderate conservative, and strong conservative. And a couple of quick observations here, pretty interesting. We can stay on this slide, is that everyone, every demographic or every subgroup there has increased to agreeing in this statement, including strong liberals, everyone there. What's interesting to me is that the group who saw the most increase, that being strong liberal, is still significantly under 50%, right? So what this says to me is that everyone over the last 3 or 4 years has gotten more careful about what they say, or at least feels like they have to self-censor because of our current political climate. But what's interesting to me is that only 1% has changed among strong conservatives, which means for the last at least 3 years, strong conservatives and conservatives down from 70% have felt the need to prevent themselves from saying things, their political beliefs, expressing their political beliefs, because society at large might find that offensive. Do you think that's a healthy thing? I guess we'll start with Chris. Chris, what do you think about that?
To a degree, yes, and to a degree, no. I would play devil's advocate and say that self-censorship is not always a bad thing.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes we think things that we shouldn't say or might need to reflect on or think about later. I really do respect the work that Cato has done over the years, again, especially on the issue of immigration. And I know they did conduct a similar study in 2017 as the article that you are sharing points out. I would like to see stats that track these questions over a longer period of time, because I'm skeptical about the idea that this is necessarily something new or unique.
Sure. Yeah. Wes, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so for the conservative side, I think that it has to deal with the word racist, right? Like that's the first thing that comes to mind is race relations. And there are so many people who don't know how to express affirmation the right way. Okay? And what I mean by that is there are good, wholesome, humane people who love other races, but they don't know how to express it. Do I call my friend black, or do I call him African American? Do I not talk about it at all? And they don't have many friends that are minorities, and they don't know the first steps. I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. I went to the Emirates several years ago, and coming off the plane, my first instinct was to look out for like the threats, right? Like, and these guys are out to get me. And within like 2 or 3 days of being in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, I was in love. This country
Yeah.
is amazing, and these guys are so sweet, and they were adorable, and like I had a blast. And by the end of it, we were going to mosques and stuff, and like I was getting all dressed up, and my wife and the whole thing, and we were very respectful. Um, even as Christians in a Muslim country, because I couldn't help but fall in love with how kind these people were, and that was such an amazing experience for me. It was my first time in a Muslim country, and I know like that there are many Muslim countries that are very different from that. But if someone hasn't had that experience, it's very hard for them to know how to see the world, especially when all they're getting is one view of it through, say, the media coverage or whatever, or maybe two views if they happen to click a channel. But without that direct experience, how do they how do they branch out and expose it when every time that they do, there's just this backlash, to call them. So you just kind of shut your mouth and you don't say it.
Yeah.
That's sad for me because it can prevent the first step. Because what if Kyle, what if someone expresses an opinion about race imperfectly? God forbid, and they didn't mean to.
Yeah, cancel them right away.
Cancel. You're
Right.
racist. How dare you, not address me the way that I wanted to be addressed before I told you that. And I think there's that fear amongst conservatives when it comes to race relations, as well as many other subjects.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you that it is partly probably about race relations, but I honestly think it's about everything. I think it goes to issues on abortion, on issues about same-sex marriage or homosexuality or immigration, or honestly anything that goes against what I would say is the mainstream zeitgeist, right? Anything that goes against those things, we're scared because we see all the people around us getting canceled all the time. Go ahead and flip it over to that next slide here. Some interesting other statistics here. 62% of Americans, just kind of summarizing that one part of the poll, 62% of Americans say that the political climate these days prevents them from saying things that they believe because others might find them offensive. And that's actually only up from 4% from 2017. So interesting that even pre-2017, it seems like over half of our country was walking on eggshells, afraid to share and express our political beliefs. But some of these differences here. So the second bullet point: majorities across the board. Democrats 52, Independents 59, Republicans 77. All agree they have political opinions that they're afraid to share. Only strong liberals stand out as the only political group who feel that they can express themselves. 58%, in fact, of people who identify as staunch liberals feel that they can say what they believe without retribution, without backlash. I guess my question for Chris is, what are the strong liberals drinking that gives them so much courage?
Cultural power.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
I mean,
honest.
Yeah,
and like I love it.
It is what it is. I mean, the left runs arts and entertainment, and to a degree, education. I mean, as a teacher, I am certainly careful with how I express myself on Facebook, a lot more so than how I express myself on, say, Twitter or among really close friends. Because I know that, higher ups could be watching and could not like what I say and could decide that I'm a bad influence on children and corrupting them with my liberal propaganda, which is only like 10% true. I think it depends on what field you work in. It depends on a lot of various factors, but I still question whether or not this is something new. You mentioned the issues of homosexuality and same-sex marriage. I think 100 years ago, if you said to your boss, I think two men should be allowed to get married, you probably stood a pretty good chance of getting fired and having the community pretty much rise against you and cancel you. And it would have been, 19th, 20th century cancel culture. I also think, with the recent Supreme Court ruling saying that you cannot fire people for being a member of the LGBT community, that was really something to celebrate. And I see a lot on the conservative side simultaneously kind of bashing that opinion, while at the same time decrying how unfair it is for, some conservative CEOs to be losing their jobs for voicing support for Trump, for instance. So I do think there's a bit of a double standard there, where there seems to be this idea that our opinions and our political opinions should be protected, maybe to a bigger degree than things that people actually do not choose.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So I guess pushing back through this, you mentioned, having a fear of maybe some people, some higher ups at your school board, looking at what you're doing here. Let's move on to this next slide here, Wes. And this is maybe the most disturbing infographic here for me. And so this question was also posed to the survey respondents. Would you support or oppose firing a business executive from their job if it became known that they privately donated money to either Trump or Biden? And so among all people, 31, man, that's 1 in 3 nearly, said that it was okay to support firing Trump donors if it came out, that they were Trump donors, and 22%, which is to me still way too high of a number, so that would be okay or support firing Biden donors for that. But what's even more, I think, crazy and more telling about the extremism and the tribalism that our nation is facing is when you delve into the subgroups a little bit more. So among those people who identify as strong liberals, so this is the bottom left, the blue chart there, among strong liberals, 50% said that they would support firing a business executive for their support of Trump. 50%. That's 1 in 2. That is entirely too much. And unfortunately, it's not that much lower among strong conservatives wanting to fire Biden donors at 36%, or 1 in 3, basically. Those are insane numbers to me. And if you look over there to the right, young Americans are also more likely than older Americans to support punishing Trump. 44% of Americans under 30% support firing executives if they donate to Trump. That's crazy to me. I don't know about you guys. What do you think? What do you think, Wes?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that speaks to the polarization, and that's something that we've talked about on this channel. Like, I just don't buy it. Like, I don't buy it. Like, sure, we can talk about the candidates, and I can tell you why Trump appeals to people, and there's some appeal to, like I said, I'm support, Kavanaugh especially, and Gorsuch to an extent. I see his foreign policy, things like that, but I don't buy into the notion that every person who is a Democrat is a socialist. I don't buy into the hysteria, and I on either side. And what I really don't buy into is demonizing people who believe differently than me. I want to try to understand why they believe what they do. I want to try to have a discussion and debate, because I believe through debate, discussion, and talking, we can prevent war, and I think it's worth preventing. I think there's a bloodthirstiness on the right that is indefensible and frankly shameful. There is a desire to engage in conflict and bring on the fight, and as someone who has experienced true war, that's not something that anyone should want. The Civil War was horrific, and people talk about how we need to get ready our pitchforks because we're headed for another one. Like, that is not something that we should seek, and that does not mean that you're courageous because you cast blame and judgment on every liberal you meet.
Sure.
The coward's way out, actually, in my opinion, I think the stronger way out is to do what our founding fathers did, which is we disagree strongly, Jefferson and Adams, but they continued working on it until they got to a point where they could talk again as friends, and it took years, but they did it, even though Jefferson was a deist, maybe even an atheist, and Adams certainly wasn't. They worked towards that point where they talk, and that's precious. When you look back at the end of your life, you're going to think about the friendships and the relationships that you had, not the people that you slandered. You're going to think back to did it mean something? And if all you have is a skeleton, a closet full of skeletons, then that's a very shallow legacy indeed. And so when that study, that's what I see is like, instead of why don't you talk to your boss, right? Why don't you why he supports Trump or why she supports Biden? The same way that we just had this discussion now, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, maybe maybe not every libertarian agrees with Joe Jorgensen. Maybe, not every Democrat is completely thrilled about Harris as the VP. Maybe every conservative is not 110% on the Trump train, right? Maybe there's some nuance that is just glossed over by a sensationalist media. And short of doing that, you get this kind of thing. So I agree with you.
Yeah, man, it's a lot easier to paint with the big brush and and paint everyone as the enemy as opposed to getting to nuanced positions for sure. So, Chris, do you agree with what Wes was saying there in terms of how we find our way back from a third to a half of people supporting the firing of someone over their political beliefs?
Somewhat. I'm a little bit agnostic on the issue of, CEOs being pressured to resign for donating to Trump. And that's because I kind of see Trump as a unique evil in American politics. Now, I am someone who is very much against at-will employment, someone who supports strong worker protections. So if you tell me that someone who, works at Walmart or, even someone really in any field who got fired by their boss for posting Trump 2020 on Facebook, I'm going to have a problem with that. However, if someone is donating thousands of dollars to the Donald Trump campaign and, is a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and then they no longer have the ability to do that, I'm not going to necessarily lead the march against that person. If my boss chooses to support whatever political candidate, I think that's their business. But if that happens to, the high-ranking CEO who is donating thousands of dollars a year to Donald Trump, I'm not necessarily going to shed any tears about that either. So do I support it? Not enthusiastically. Do I oppose it? Not enthusiastically either. But in general, do I support firing employees for the political candidate that they choose to support? Absolutely not.
Yeah. That's a good position. So that last stat there, 32%, I guess is why it rings home for me. So even though I identify mostly as a libertarian, I grew up pretty conservative, and I'm still, I would probably identify as strongly conservative on a poll like this, even though, libertarian probably more accurate. So even doing this, I believe, last time or the time before that we did this show, I said, look, I got to talk really carefully around this issue because, if I say something that doesn't sound good or or if I say something that maybe is offensive to a certain group of people, I could lose my job for that. And so 32% is the last bullet point there. 32% of employed Americans say they personally are worried about missing out on career opportunities or losing their job if their political opinions become known. And so truthfully, I post a little bit of political stuff on Facebook, not nearly the content that I would like to. And even when I'm thinking about doing this show or, I'm developing my own website platform, I've actually been really kind of considering, do I use my own name? Do I come up with a pseudonym? Do I write anonymously? Do I produce those things anonymously? I don't know, because that is a real fear for me working in corporate America. Branding is everything, and reputational risk especially is a really big thing in my industry. So definitely something that I'm concerned about and worried about. And we can just touch on this last point really quickly here, this last slide. I know we're kind of running long. So this was perhaps for me the most interesting or maybe the most unexplainable or at least clearly explainable graphic here. So Republicans with the most education are the most worried about their political views could harm them at work. So you see it pretty steady across. Democrats there, that blue line, 23, 24, 25, depending on their education, not really worried about their political views harming them at work. But the higher education you go among Republicans, the more worried Republicans tend to be. And I kind of posed that question before to the group, and Chris, you had a pretty interesting answer or explanation as to why that is.
Yeah, so my theory is more educated conservatives tend to probably work in fields that are more predominantly liberal. So, if you are a conservative who's working mostly among other conservatives and you're not in the realm of politics, you are probably more working, generally speaking, a blue-collar job. Whereas if you are someone who's highly educated and you are working in a different field, that field is probably more likely dominated by liberals, and you would have more of a reason to fear being fired.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's kind of where I was coming down on this issue as well. In fact, another observation that I was coming to was the more time that a person spends in the American universities, spending time working on degrees, I think the more they see how incompatible republicanism is with the mainstream. What do you think about that, Wes?
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to do it. The biggest thing that you have to fight is the stereotype, right? Is you have to
Sure.
that, but I think that exists with everybody. I mean, we've done that on this show before, as we've talked about how one of the things when I say conservative, many people are going to assume that I don't have affectionate feelings for people that are from the LGBTQ community.
Sure.
So my first thing to do is to talk about the fact that I love people who identify that way. I have friends who identify that way. So,
Yeah.
just because I personally don't, or I go to, a church that, doesn't necessarily endorse that as, a Christ-like lifestyle, does not mean that I immediately go to hate or judgment or,
Mm.
anything like that for someone who disagrees. But, that exists, everywhere. Like, so many conservatives believe that every single liberal hates America, hates the idea of the American founding. I mean, I posted a thing today, and it was a Trump tweet where he says he is the last hope for the American dream and the ideals of the founding, and
Yeah, it's crazy.
which means that it's exclusive to his supporters and Republicans, which is just not true. There were liberals there: Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson. We've talked about them. Plenty of others as well through the years who have contributed in meaningful ways. And so that's a stereotype that, if you did this study in the military, I wonder how many people who identify as gay would have the same type of struggles. If
Sure.
I came out, amongst my group of Marines, would they treat me differently? If I came out as a Democrat, in my Army regiment, how would people treat me, right? We've had issues with that in the military with don't ask, don't tell, and now,
Sure.
I mean, look at what Trump has tried to do, in terms of rolling back some of those things. So it's simply the bigger issue of how do we communicate our beliefs against a stereotype that is so quickly to assume the worst.
Yeah, that's really good, man. So kind of a couple of thoughts here. I think you're right. I think the idea of, or how do we overcome this, is through conversation. It's through having good conversations with people who have different ideas and different beliefs and different values than us, and showing them that we are people of nuance, that we're people of substance, that you can't paint us with a big brush for sure. But I see a poll like this, man, and I say I get concerned for our country when only one half of the group, and really only maybe half of that group, so the people who identify as strongly liberal, feel like they can in open society speak as they want to. I think that we can't really exist as a country. We can't exist peacefully as a country when more than half of the country can't express what they want to say or what they believe politically. And of course, I'm not talking about extreme fringe views that are actually racist or abhorrent or anything like that. I'm talking about just general mainstream conservative principles that would not be acceptable in the eyes of those strong liberals. So. Yeah, I appreciate your guys' input and your conversation on that. Pretty interesting.
That's awesome. And then that is, again, the goal of what we're doing here, right? Is it takes a minute for some people to understand the point of this project because they see Burkean conservative and they're like, okay, I don't know what Burkean means. Maybe I'll figure that out. But I see conservative and I assume that he's going to endorse everything that Donald Trump says, or he's going to be a card-carrying 100% endorsement of the Republican Party in every single issue. And then they are shocked whenever I post things that are seemingly contradictory, and they are for a reason, because
Right.
it's like, I post an article here to get people's thoughts on that, and then I post that there. So we're doing this interview with George Will, who is an atheist, and he's very much an opponent of Donald Trump. We're doing another interview this week with another speaker named Rick Green, and he is a huge fan of.
I know Rick Green. That's cool.
Yeah.
Not personally, but I know who he is. Yeah.
We're gonna talk to him too this next week, and so and you know what? I'm gonna have a great time with both of them. How about that, right? Like in the same.
Yeah. Amen, brother. That's cool.
You guys, it's like listening to Chris talk about his perspective on liberalism and the Democratic Party, and the same thing with you, Kyle. I was listening to your nuance on the libertarian ticket and the parts that you like and don't like. So those differences they're engaging. It takes work, but it's worth it, because again, I could go back to going to a foreign country, and I think it's going to be terrifying, and I'm going to be in danger, and I walk out like that was an awesome time, and I just met a whole bunch of friends, and I just experienced things that I never would, and I've got a different view of the world, a more educated, a more mature view of the world that sees that nuance that is frankly what is worth conserving in the first place. So so that's our commitment here. It's awesome that people are starting to notice that in George Will. People are starting to tune in to shows like this one. We're starting to get comments every week, and I'm excited for the future as we kind of build this movement and create a space that is frankly different than the environments that you were talking about on those studies, and better in many ways. So last comments. Chris, I want to give you the last word. So if you want to write us out.
Yeah, I mean, to jump off your earlier comment about don't ask, don't tell, I think it does it matter to keep in perspective that, cancel culture, even though it's a new name, it's a really old problem, and it expresses itself differently in every subculture. There's never been a time or place where certain opinions, when expressed, wouldn't get you shunned by the larger community. That's not to say it's not a problem on the left. It's not to say it's not a growing problem on the left. I do question the extent of it and the attention it gets relative to conservative cancel culture, which again see regarding Mitt Romney. But I do think it's important to keep that in perspective.
Yeah, it's awesome. We call that out when we see it, and then we facilitate an environment that's better. That's certainly better, and takes steps to continue to be better. So, thank you guys. Thanks for the episode. I mean, we covered so much ground. This was awesome. So, always appreciate your time. Looking to do this again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.